I knew moving into a gated community was going to come with rules, but I never expected to have a middle-aged tyrant with a clipboard dictating how I could enter my own home. It all started the week after I moved into my new place in Crestmeadow Heights. I'm Franklin Harlow, a 39-year-old former Army mechanic who now works remote IT for a university. 3 months ago, I was hit by a drunk driver while riding my motorcycle. Compound fractures, nerve damage, 6 surgeries. I got lucky just being alive. But walking. That wasn't going to happen for a while, so yeah, I use a wheelchair now. And because my home has 3 concrete steps leading to the front door, I had a professional install a temporary aluminum ramp. It wasn't fancy, just safe and solid. I even pulled the city permit and double-checked the local zoning codes. Everything was above board. Except, apparently, with the HOA, 3 days after it was installed, I found a pink notice duct taped to my front door. Unapproved exterior modification. Ramp must be removed within 72 hours or you will be fined $100 per day. I stared at the paper like it was a joke. Nope, real signature, real HOA letterhead. I hadn't even met anyone from the board yet. That changed fast. The very next morning, I was rolling out to grab the mail when I came face to face with her Cheryl Vanwick. Mid-50s, frosted hair, oversized sunglasses, and that permanent expression like she just smelled something sour. She had a little white dog in her left arm and a binder in her right. "You must be Mr. Harlow," she said, not even trying to fake a smile. "We need to talk about that. Eyesore." I blinked. "You mean the ramp?" "Yes, the ramp," she said, like the word itself offended her. "It violates the community design charter. We have very strict rules about exterior modifications. Anything visible from the street must be approved by the board." "Lady, it's a wheelchair ramp," I said. "I legally need it to get in and out of my house." "Then you should have submitted a request," she said briskly. "Regardless of your circumstances, rules are rules." I pointed to the permit posted in my window. "City gave me the green light. It's not permanent. I'll take it down when I don't need it anymore." Cheryl clutched her binder tighter. "The city doesn't run this neighborhood, the HOA does." "You'll need to take it down by Friday." I started laughing. "You think I'm going to remove the only way I can access my own home because of your binder?" She didn't laugh. "You'll be fined, daily, and further violations may result in legal enforcement." "Legal enforcement?" I asked. "Over a ramp," Cheryl's lips curled. "You'd be surprised what the HOA can do." I didn't respond. I just rolled back inside, closed the door, and called a lawyer. Her name was Monica Welch, and she was exactly the kind of pit bull you want when dealing with petty tyrants. She specialized in ADA law and had gone toe-to-toe with more than a few HOAs over disability access. "Let them fine you," she said. "Document everything, and whatever you do, don't take down that ramp." Fine. I was ready for the long haul, but Cheryl wasn't. Because the next week, I came home from a doctor's appointment to find the ramp gone, I stared in disbelief. The bolts were still drilled into the concrete, but the actual ramp vanished, just like that. I wheeled over to my neighbor's porch, Donna, sweet lady in her 60s who baked cookies for everyone on the block, and asked if she'd seen anything. "You bet I did," she said, already halfway out the door with a mug of sweet tea. "That HOA woman Cheryl showed up with 2 men in vests. Said she was enforcing a compliance order. They unbolted it and loaded it into a pickup. It was gone in 10 minutes. I sat there, stunned. They stole my ramp." Donna nodded. "I told them it wasn't right. She said he can file a complaint if he doesn't like it." She even laughed. That was it. No more fines, no more threats. They want legal enforcement. "They're getting it," I called Monica. She didn't even hesitate. "That's theft, Franklin, and it's a violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act. They just opened themselves up to a massive lawsuit." We filed the next morning. ADA violation, property damage, emotional distress, plus theft of medical equipment. Monica went straight for the jugular. Cheryl tried to play dumb in her deposition. "I didn't remove anything," she said, shifting in her seat like the chair was too hot. The board authorized a correction of an unapproved modification. Monica didn't let her off easy. You authorized the removal of a wheelchair ramp from a disabled veteran's home. Cheryl glanced at her attorney. It was a design violation. The ramp wasn't aesthetically consistent with the community standard. And what standard is that? Monica asked. Being able to climb stairs, even Cheryl's lawyer winced, but that was just round one. We subpoenaed the HOA's internal emails. Turns out Cheryl had been complaining about me before I even moved in. She called my ramp an industrial monstrosity and said it would drag down property values. She even suggested fining me before I'd even installed it. Worse, we found an email where she literally wrote, "If he can't comply, maybe this isn't the neighborhood for him." That one email changed the game. It wasn't about rules, it was discrimination. Monica filed a motion to escalate the case to federal court under Title III of the ADA. Cheryl and the HOA tried to settle. They offered me $10,000 and a formal apology. I said no. I wanted more than that. I wanted her house. The moment that email surfaced, the one where Cheryl effectively suggested I didn't belong in the neighborhood, the tone of everything changed. Gone was the smug confidence, the clipped legalese. Her attorney started requesting delays, filing motions for confidentiality, and offering settlements that increased in desperation with every passing week. But it was too late. What she had done wasn't just cruel, it was illegal, and now it was documented. The federal court accepted the escalation. That alone sent tremors through Crest Meadow Heights HOA board. Federal ADA cases draw attention, especially when there's evidence of willful discrimination. Monica and I weren't just aiming for a slap on the wrist. We were going for landmark territory. But before the case could reach the courtroom, something else happened, and it hit harder than any legal motion. 2 weeks after the deposition, a dark green SUV rolled up in front of my house just after 7 in the morning. 2 people stepped out, both in dark jackets with U.S. Department of Justice stenciled on the back. I watched from the living room window as they knocked on Donna's door, then moved down the block. They weren't here for interviews. They were serving subpoenas. By noon, I knew why. Monica called, her voice tighter than I'd ever heard it. "Franklin, we're not the only ones suing them," she said. The Department of Justice opened a federal investigation. Turns out the HOA's been systematically rejecting accessibility modifications for years. Your case just cracked it open. I leaned back in my chair, stunned. You're saying this isn't just about me? Not even close. They've denied ramps, lifts, handrails, everything. There's a couple 2 blocks over who had to sell their house after their daughter's stairlift request was denied. This goes deeper than we thought. It didn't take long for the media to catch wind. A local reporter showed up on my doorstep, asking for a statement. I didn't give one. Monica advised against it, but I could tell from the questions she asked that the story was already spreading. Meanwhile, Cheryl vanished. Not literally, but she stopped walking her dog, stopped attending board meetings, stopped sending out those little monthly newsletters with passive-aggressive reminders about trash bins. Her white Lexus stayed parked beneath a tarp in her driveway for weeks. The HOA tried to put on a united front, but they were unraveling fast. Then the police got involved. A detective from the county precinct reached out to Monica with a curious question. Did I want to press criminal charges for theft? Apparently, when Cheryl authorized the removal of the ramp, she didn't just violate civil law. She orchestrated a physical removal of private medical equipment without a warrant, probable cause, or any kind of legal authority. That crossed into criminal territory. I gave them a statement. I showed them the receipts, the installation permit, the medical documents. And then I handed over Donna's security camera footage. She had upgraded her system a year ago after a string of package thefts. High resolution, night vision, time-stamped. It showed everything. Cheryl standing next to 2 hired workers, directing them to unbolt and carry off the ramp. She even pointed toward the street like she was conducting traffic. The detective watched the footage twice. Then he asked if I wanted to press charges. I do, I said. Absolutely. Within a week, Cheryl was arrested. The official charge was larceny of medical equipment, a felony in our state. She posted bail the same day, but the mugshot made the rounds online and the fallout was immediate. Residents started attending HOA meetings in record numbers. A recall petition against the board began circulating. The neighborhood Facebook group lit up with furious threads. That night, Donna knocked on my door holding a stack of manila envelopes. "These were in my mailbox," she said. "No return address." Inside each envelope were copies of HOA meeting transcripts, internal memos, and correspondence going back 5 years. Highlighted sections revealed patterns of behavior: rejecting modifications for disabled residents, issuing disproportionate fines to racial minorities, even manipulating landscaping violations to force out families with kids. One memo chilled me. It was from Cheryl to the board's legal advisor. "If we let one of them through, they'll all try it. You have to hold the line. Uniformity is the only way to preserve value." That was the final nail. Monica compiled everything into a supplemental brief. The judge fast-tracked the trial date, citing public interest and potential widespread civil rights violations. The DOJ announced a formal civil rights suit against the HOA, and Crest Meadow Heights became the center of a storm it never saw coming. I stayed quiet through most of it. I didn't do interviews. I didn't post online. I just prepared. Monica coached me through the deposition, the hearings, the statements. I kept my head down and let the law do what it was built to do. When the trial began, it wasn't in some tiny municipal courtroom, it was in the federal building downtown with reporters outside and a packed gallery. Cheryl took the stand first. Gone was the faux confidence. She looked brittle, like someone who'd spent weeks losing sleep. Her voice trembled as she tried to explain that she only wanted to protect the neighborhood's integrity. Monica stood. "Is removing a disabled veteran's only means of entering his home part of that integrity?" Cheryl hesitated. "It wasn't personal. But it was deliberate," Monica said. "And you knew exactly what you were doing." Then it was my turn. I spoke plainly. I talked about the accident, the surgeries, the daily pain. I described the hours I spent trapped inside my home after the ramp was removed, waiting for a friend to come help me down the steps like a child. I told them how it felt to watch someone in authority treat my basic mobility like a design flaw. I watched the jurors' faces. I didn't need to sell anything. The truth did that for me. The verdict came quickly: guilty of discrimination under the Americans with Disabilities Act, and liable for damages relating to theft and emotional distress. The HOA was ordered to pay me a 6-figure settlement, but that wasn't all. Because Cheryl's house had been used as collateral for the HOA's legal defense fund, a maneuver she pushed through without full board approval. And now, they couldn't pay the judgment, so the court seized her house. I didn't even have to bid. It was awarded as part of the settlement. The keys were delivered to me by a court officer, along with a written order transferring the deed. I moved in 2 weeks later. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The house that once belonged to the woman who said I didn't belong here was now mine, and I made a few modifications, nothing drastic. Just a wide, gently sloped concrete ramp at the front door, sleek brushed metal railings. Subtle, tasteful, ADA compliant. At the next HOA meeting I showed up early, same table, same microphones. But this time I sat at the head. The recall petition had succeeded. The entire board was replaced. I didn't run for anything I didn't need to. Just seeing me there in what used to be Cheryl's seat was enough for most people to realize the neighborhood had changed. After the meeting, a man I'd never met approached me. Older guy, maybe in his 70s, with a cane and a tremor in his hands. "I just want to say thank you," he said quietly. "I've lived here since the place was built. I thought I'd have to move because I couldn't do the stairs anymore." "You don't," I said. "Not anymore." That night, as I rolled up my new driveway and into my new garage, I looked at the spot where Cheryl used to park her Lexus. Then I looked at the ramp I'd built this time with no fear of it being ripped away. Justice didn't just knock on her door, it moved in. I didn't throw a housewarming party after moving into Cheryl's old place. I didn't hang banners or pop champagne or post triumphant selfies. I just quietly unpacked, adjusted the furniture to accommodate my wheelchair, and had the locks changed. There was something surreal about living where she once ruled with her clipboard and petty threats, but I wasn't here to gloat. I was here to rebuild in every sense of the word. The neighborhood had shifted. People who once kept their heads down had started speaking up. At first, it was a trickle. A woman down the street who had been fined for having a bird feeder. A single dad who'd been cited for excessive yard toys after his son set up a basketball hoop. Then came the flood. Residents with old photos, documents, and audio recordings from HOA meetings that had never made it into the official minutes. All of it pointed to the same thing: Cheryl and the former board had been running Crestmeadow Heights like a fiefdom. Selective enforcement, backroom deals with contractors, and completely fabricated violations to pressure residents they didn't like. And while the DOJ lawsuit loomed over the HOA like a storm cloud, something darker was just beginning to surface. It started with a manila envelope that showed up at my front door. No name, no return address, just a single word written in block letters across the front: review. Inside were photocopies of invoices, all billed to the HOA's maintenance budget over the past 6 years. Dozens of them. Some were for landscaping services that had supposedly been performed on homes that didn't even have grass. Others were for security upgrades that didn't exist: phantom cameras, uninstalled motion lights, non-existent patrols. The kicker: all of the payments had been processed through a company called Clearview Community Services, LLC. A quick search showed the company had no website, no listed phone number, and one registered address: a P.O. box in a strip mall 3 towns over. I handed everything to Monica. "I've seen this before," she said, flipping through the pages. "Shell companies, fake vendors, they were embezzling HOA funds." I blinked. "You're saying Cheryl wasn't just power-hungry, she was running a racket." "Looks like it," she said. "And if the board approved these expenses without verifying the work, they're either complicit or negligent. Either way, this is criminal." We turned it over to the Dodge Civil Rights Division, who were already deep into their investigation. Within a week, the FBI showed up. Not quietly, not in suits and ties. They arrived in marked vehicles with agents in windbreakers and boxes in hand. They didn't just visit the HOA office, they raided it. Donna called me from her porch, whispering like she was narrating a nature documentary. "They're carting out file cabinets," she said. "One of them had to use a dolly. I haven't seen Cheryl since the trial, but her name's still on half the folders they're carrying." I rolled outside to see for myself. Sure enough, the agents were moving with methodical precision, sealing evidence boxes and loading them into their vehicles. I didn't approach. I didn't have to. They knew where to find me if they needed anything. That night, I received a call from a local journalist named Kira Esteban. She'd been following the case since the beginning, but had only recently gained access to the HOA's financial disclosures. Her voice crackled with energy. "There's nearly $200,000 unaccounted for," she said, "all paid to Clearview. And we just found out the LLC was registered under Cheryl's cousin's name. He doesn't even live in the state." I let that sit for a moment. So she was laundering HOA dues through a fake company and pocketing the money. "Looks that way," Kira said. "Also, you're going to want to see what they found behind the HOA building." I met her the next morning. The HOA office sat on the edge of the neighborhood, a squat brick building next to a retention pond. It always looked too large for its function, and now I knew why. Behind it, agents had unearthed what looked like a buried storage unit. A concrete hatch, partially rusted, led to a bunker-like room that had been sealed off for years. Inside were stacks of HOA violation notices, hundreds of them never delivered. Some were addressed to homeowners who had moved away years ago. Others bore handwritten notes in the margins. Notes that made my stomach turn. Push them out fast. Fine them until they sell. Contractors interested in the lot apply pressure. This wasn't just corruption. It was a coordinated effort to force out homeowners and seize control of properties. And they had tried to do it to me too, with the ramp, the fines, the removal. Mine just happened to be the case that blew the whole thing open. I left the site without a word. I didn't need to say anything. The truth was crawling out of the dirt on its own. 2 weeks later, federal charges were filed against Sherrill and 2 former board members. Wire fraud, mail fraud, conspiracy to commit racketeering, the kind of charges that come with real prison time. They were quietly arrested and booked through the federal courthouse. No cameras this time, just the cold machinery of justice grinding forward. But even as the legal system caught up with them, the neighborhood still needed fixing. At the next HOA meeting, I stood before the room not as a plaintiff or a victim, but as a resident. We were electing a new board from scratch. No more insiders. No more unopposed elections or secret ballots. This time the process was open. Donna nominated me for president. I declined. "I'll help," I said, "but I'm not running the show. This needs to be a community." Instead, I proposed a rotating leadership system, a council of 5 residents, each serving staggered terms, all meetings recorded, all finances published monthly. Every violation required photographic evidence and a majority vote. It passed unanimously. Over the next few months, we rewrote the bylaws from the ground up. We eliminated the vague language about aesthetic harmony and replaced it with clear, measurable guidelines. We established an accessibility committee to ensure no disabled resident would ever be denied a modification again. And we opened up the HOA's books to any homeowner who wanted to inspect them. The first time someone filed a complaint under the new system, it was about a sagging fence. The council reviewed it, voted publicly, and issued a friendly fix-it notice with a list of licensed contractors. No fines, no threats, just neighbors being neighbors, and not long after that, a young couple with a son in a wheelchair moved in down the street. They installed a permanent ramp before they even unpacked. I passed by while they were still settling in, and the father waved me over. "You're the reason we bought here," he said. "We read about what happened. We figured if this place changed because of you, it's worth being part of." I didn't know what to say. I just nodded. Later that week, I planted a small tree in the front yard of my new home. A maple, young but sturdy. I didn't do it for symbolism. I did it because I wanted roots here. Not the kind laid in concrete or inscribed on plaques. The kind that grow quietly over time, steady and unshakable. Sherrill's house was mine now. But more importantly, so was the future of Crestmeadow Heights, and we were going to make damn sure it belonged to everyone. The first time I stepped onto Sherrill's old back patio, now mine, I noticed something strange about the concrete. There were faint rectangular outlines against the surface, like something large had been bolted down and then hastily removed. I crouched to inspect it closer and found rust stains where metal had once touched the cement, but no bolts remained. It didn't seem important at the time, just another odd remnant left behind by someone who never expected to lose everything. That changed when a letter showed up in my mailbox. No name, no return address, just a single folded page inside an envelope that smelled faintly of mildew. "You need to check the crawl space, under the patio." She hid more than paperwork. I didn't know if it was a prank or some weird leftover grudge from the community drama, but the language was too specific to ignore. I hadn't even known there was a crawl space beneath the patio. My home inspector hadn't flagged anything unusual, but maybe Sherrill had more secrets than anyone realized. I geared up that afternoon. Flashlight, gloves, and my neighbor Vince, a retired firefighter with no sense of fear and a lot of curiosity. We found the entrance behind a loose board near the utility closet. It wasn't visible from inside the house or the yard and had clearly been sealed with intention. Vince pulled it open, sending a puff of stale air and cobwebs into the room. We slid inside and crawled through the narrow passage until we reached the underside of the patio. The space was tight, but not empty. Covered in a tarp and duct tape was a series of plastic storage bins, 6 of them, all labeled with numbers, not words. Vince cut the tape with his knife and lifted the lid on the first bin. Inside were files. Hundreds of them. Not digital backups or HOA forms, but medical records, tax documents, personal information. Names, social security numbers, even photocopies of checks. Some belonged to current residents. Others were from people who had moved out years ago. I opened another bin. Inside were small black devices, audio recorders, most of them switched off, but one still blinking red. Another bin held a stack of envelopes. Each one contained cash, some 50s, some hundreds. Sloppy bundles, rubber banded by the dozen. Vince exhaled slowly. This isn't just corruption, man. This is a whole operation. We backed out without touching anything else and called the local police. When they heard what we'd found, they transferred us directly to a federal investigator who had already been working the HOA financial case. Within 2 hours, my property was crawling with agents, not just DOJ staff, but cybercrime specialists and forensic accountants. One of the lead agents, a tall woman with gray streaks in her ponytail, pulled me aside as they photographed the bins. She wasn't just mismanaging funds, she said. She was running identity theft scams. Looks like she used the HOA's access to personal records to open credit lines, file false tax returns, and launder money through ghost accounts. I stared at the bins. That's why she fought so hard to stay in control. Exactly, the agent said. The HOA wasn't just a power trip for her. It was the front. The news broke within 24 hours. Headlines ran across local and national networks. HOA president linked to financial crime ring. Dozens in Crest Meadow victimized by identity fraud. Some residents got phone calls from their banks before they even saw the news. Others found out when their credit alerts lit up with activity they didn't recognize. The community snapped into action. For the first time since I'd moved in, every porch light stayed on after dark. Neighbors who had barely spoken to one another before were suddenly organizing block meetings, sharing information, comparing bank statements. A few even brought over trays of food to my place, thanking me for exposing everything, though I'd never planned to become a whistleblower. One couple, the Rileys, found out their retirement fund had been drained months earlier, but the bank had flagged it as a routine withdrawal. Another woman, Miss Alston, discovered someone had used her information to lease a car in another state. The fraud stretched farther than anyone imagined, and it all traced back to Cheryl, the kicker. She'd used her position on the board to push through a motion that granted her sole access to certain HOA files for efficiency. The motion had passed because the board had trusted her or been too afraid to question her. Either way, she'd built an empire of stolen data right beneath everyone's noses. The federal case expanded. Cheryl was dragged back into custody, this time not for embezzlement or discrimination, but for orchestrating an interstate fraud operation. The charges stacked higher than the bins in my crawlspace. Wire fraud, identity theft, conspiracy, money laundering, unauthorized surveillance, even mail fraud, since she'd used HOA correspondence to collect sensitive documents under false pretenses. Her cousin, the one listed as the owner of Clearview Community Services, turned out to be a shell as well. A man with no employment history, no assets, and a long rap sheet. He was arrested in Arizona 2 days later. By the time the trial date was set, there were over 70 confirmed victims in the neighborhood alone. The DOJ offered to consolidate the charges into a single case, but many residents chose to file their own suits too. The HOA, now fully under new leadership, cooperated with authorities and released every bit of documentation they had. The courtroom was packed on the day Cheryl was sentenced. I wasn't in the front row I didn't need to be. I sat near the back, next to Donna and Vince, as the judge read out each charge. The final tally was staggering: 22 counts, a maximum sentence of over 70 years. The judge settled on 25 with no possibility of parole for at least 18. She didn't look at anyone as they let her out. No tears. No apologies. Just a blank, sunken face that barely resembled the woman who once strutted through the neighborhood like she owned it. After the sentencing, I returned home and stood outside on the ramp, not the temporary one, but the full, permanent structure I'd installed with my own money and a licensed contractor. It wasn't just a ramp anymore. It was a reminder of how this all started. A single act of cruelty that unraveled an entire criminal enterprise. The new HOA board, now fully resident-run and transparent, held a neighborhood gathering that weekend. No speeches. No formalities. Just food trucks, folding chairs, and a long table filled with potluck dishes. For the first time since I moved in, the community felt like, well, a community. Vince tossed me a soda and pointed toward the corner of the park, where a small wooden sign had been installed under the shade of a sycamore tree. I wheeled over and read the engraving, in honor of standing your ground when others tried to take it from you. I didn't know who paid for the sign. Nobody ever told me, but I left it there, untouched. A quiet marker in a neighborhood that had finally started healing. Some scars remained. People were still recovering their finances, their credit, their peace of mind, but there was progress. The kind that doesn't come from lawsuits or headlines, but from trust rebuilt one conversation at a time. As for me, I stayed. I added a few modifications to the house, planted a small herb garden, and helped oversee the installation of accessible sidewalks around the community. Not because I had to, because I could. And because I knew that if anyone ever tried to pull something like that again, they'd have the entire neighborhood to answer to.